Dolly, I think we can start. I think we have a good number of participants already.
Yes, we can. I have started the recording.
Prachi and Reuben, hi. We will start now. Okay, so good evening, everyone. I think we are back on our routine on Thursday, and we are having our next episode of PiCA Thesis Forum. And we are delighted to have today Prachi Jatia from batch of 2015 and our alumni Reuben Roy from batch of 2013. Prachi will be presenting her thesis revolving around, she states, making the invisible visible, uh, reconciliation of urban street children, whereas Reuben will be presenting his bachelor's as well as master's thesis. His bachelor thesis actually was to design an integrated learning center, whereas his master's thesis actually states one for all. So I welcome you all, and on behalf of our students' body, Ishwar and Rajalakshmi from fifth year will be moderating this session. I welcome you all, and I think we can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Neha ma'am, for the introduction. Today, here we have is Reuben Roy, a Master of Architecture graduate from UNSW and an ex-PiCAN from 2013-2018 batch. Reuben is currently working at BVN in its Sydney studio. He would be presenting both his undergraduate as well as master's thesis today. Reuben's master's thesis is currently amongst the 6 entries nominated by the university for the INDE Awards 2021 in the graduate category. Moreover, Reuben is a Dean's Merit List recipient and has received multiple scholarships, including the Future of Change scholarship and the Sidla International Travel Scholarship over past 2 years. At PiCA, Reuben received the Best Creative Designer Award consecutively in 2013, 14, and 16. And his thesis was nominated for PCERF Design Competition as well as AEAT Thesis Entry for the Council of Architecture. We are excited to have you here, Reuben. You may start with your presentation.
Sorry, I dropped off back there. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. The host has disabled participant sharing.
Just a minute, Reuben.
No, sorry, it's my bad.
You can start presenting your screen,
Just gonna.
Yeah.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. I'd like to start by thanking everybody for setting the whole thing up. It's been good to see a couple of familiar faces after such a long time. I had a couple of people tell me that since I am sort of presenting two theses, it would be good if start with something that's a little bit more familiar and relative and then jump into my master's thesis. So I'm going to start off with my undergrad work. Hopefully aiming at addressing some of the things that might probably help you when you're heading in right now. Yep, so Integral Learning Center was my undergraduate thesis. I think one of the major problems that most of you guys face when you start off with your thesis is selecting that one good topic, reaching at that one specific particular point, which is the trick of it. You want it to be in a lot of ways unique, so it stands out, but you don't want it to sound crazy in a lot of ways. You want to do a housing project or what and whatnot. I think something that helps set up the whole thing is first looking at stuff that you like, stuff that you've always wanted to do. For me, it was look at an education system, look at, in my undergrad, it was look at a system that probably I think is not perfect. And as an architect, what I can do probably to look into making it a bit more, tweak it in a little bit more and contribute in a lot of my ways. Hence, I started off by thinking of designing a school, and the basic part revolved around designing a structure surrounding it. So the first part was getting to the background of it, the second, the research, and third, my intervention. Yep, the most difficult part, I think, in terms of selecting a topic is this particular page. Not necessary that you actually have to put this in your research, but it's something that I think you most definitely should do. It's putting into words, in limited number of words, the things that you want to do in your project. In my particular case, I wanted to design something that's in the subtitle, basically, that sorry. Yeah, that's basically shelter students which are guided by guiding and character molding takes place. And this is pretty vague at this particular point, but that's the crux of it. It's one particular thing. And this you will see on when I move on to my master's project as well, that getting that short, but a single line version is what sort of would guide you throughout, because there are going to be points wherein you're going to end up and go so deep in research that you lose track of what was your initial topic, what was your initial goal. You can start off designing a cultural center and then end up designing a dance academy if you don't go back to that very question that you wanted to answer. Luckily, and this is something that I would keep on suggesting, is do your research about the project that you want to do. It's better if you do not go for a hypothetical site, in my perspective, because a hypothetical site involves a lot of intangible elements that you lose a lot of time in researching. But when you have something that you're sort of aiming for, something that's already been researched and the data that you already have, it gives you much more clarity in terms of what you're gonna end up with. So what I did in both my master's and my undergraduate research was choosing a proposed topic. So that is basically choosing something that already has a justification, so you won't end up losing almost half an hour of your final graduate thesis justifying your thesis topic, because it's already justified for you. In my particular case, it was identifying an education system that I liked, and then aligning it with the existing proposal of a tribal school that I'd already researched much about. You can start your research way before your actual thesis starts. I started mine when I was doing my internship. I'd gone to a couple of buildings and done a couple of case studies before actually finalizing my topic, because that again gives you much more clarity on what you want to do and not what you had in mind. This is a documentation of a project that I had visited, and they had an existing proposal in a rural context. I'd done a couple of interviews with the people who lived there, who taught there, which again lets you sort of narrow down the brief into what exactly would the building that you're proposing give. All of these things may seem pretty small at the onset, but what we do not understand is that in real life or in design, when you actually get into it, what matters is which user group you cater to, which user group you address the design to, and how your design sort of progresses from day one till completion. After that, just to get a clarity on what sort of educational typologies I would be tackling, I mapped the education methods around the globe, which I don't think it's there completely here, but were around 50. And these were the ones excluding those in India. I've cut in a lot of pages from my research, just being mindful of time. But at the onset, you go and have a look back at all of them and look and understand what is that one particular factor that you liked. Looked at different alternative methods around the globe. Just started off with Montessori, but there were 7. Then move to the different educational typologies in India. And this is a very specific research in terms of school. The reason I bring this up is that most of the times when students start with an education project or a school project, the first question that they try to answer is what sort of spaces that I want in my school. And that is directly correlating to the type of education system that you're designing to. Is it a public school? Is it a private school? At my work currently at BVN, I work in education. And one thing that we majorly do on and off is workshops with students, where we end up talking to them, ask them what sort of space they want. If they say we need a pond inside the school, that's where you get the most craziest of ideas, and not probably from your own experience. Moving ahead, much ahead actually, you go into intervention, wherein you look at, as I earlier said, the case studies that you already did, and the case studies of good and bad at the same time. Some people choose to do only precedents of the exemplary schools, but I would say do bad precedents, do bad case studies. Only then would you understand what not to do, because that's more than what you have to do. Then looking at the site in terms of extended context and understanding what sort of a cultural backbone does your design need. If it's a rural school, it's different if it's an urban, and if it's in the city. Looking at the design drivers once you get into the nitty-gritties of the site. And then at the end, formulating more design specific responses. I'm gonna go full screen from here, sorry. But yeah, so after all that processes, you're going to end up with what we call an area program, which basically gives you guidelines as to how big the bubbles in your proximity diagram need to be. And to be completely frank, I think there isn't a different process. Some people say that you start with the design and then the function is defined as per as the form, but I personally do not agree to that. I think a form essentially wouldn't come until and unless it's for a good function. And you don't necessarily need to push the form to any sort of a building. But again, as I said, personal opinions. Jumping much ahead into your thesis, you get into a stage where you develop your design. We've always been told that use softwares as drafting tools, and don't really use them to draft. It's part right, part wrong. I know some people who do beautiful drawings with softwares, and some people who do amazing sketches. I think both are good, but I always feel that in an academic perspective, and not a professional one, that there's always much more life in your drawings, because you are not limited to certain guidelines, and that essentially comes out if you draw it with your hand. So you start off with the planning. I always do my process when I draw something on tracings, or if you have an iPad, however things have changed, you essentially draw stuff out, you can scan them, and then focus on the presentation. These were from really long back, so don't really judge me. These were the sections. Again, when you're looking, if I'm talking about representation now, a little bit less about process, it's always good to represent everything that's connected vertically in a section, which is pretty obvious. But what we tend to do, and most people ask us to design in sections, it's a good process, but I think it should be a bit both. You understand what spaces you need, where those spaces are, and then you sort of look at them in section. So you can start with something as basic as a bubble diagram, and then decide which two spaces on different levels you want to design. This is in specific to a low-rise building. My master's thesis is a high-rise project, and you'd understand how very different that is from this. And last but not the least, in any project, the most important part is taking something that's very close to heart and understanding its complete functionality as much as you can. You can go into details such as your nuts and your bolts if you want, and you can choose to keep it at an urban level. To be honest, there are projects which are urban scale, they don't really need to go into this detail. I've focused my career around high performance architecture and building detail systems, which is why both my projects have certain elements that are taken out of a project and designed in detail. But in an urban plan, so in an urban plan design or in a housing project, you don't essentially do that. If you're designing for a 27 acre project or a township, you focus at the spaces in between buildings and not one building in itself, because you can get caught up in trying to resolve everything and then losing the entire crux of your question. So again, try to focus whatever you're working on your question, and at every given point, go back to it. Again, sorry, last page. Jumping into my master's project. I don't know if I would give a thesis question for it, but again, this, if you can notice the differences in both, it's the same structure in terms of understanding what the project is. I started with the research, moved into the program, looked at the core design strategies I needed for the program, resolved something called as a public domain, which is something new to me, and I think shouldn't really start at a master's level, but also at the undergrad level. If it's an urban specific project, public domain is something that you have to address to. This was not the case in terms of the previous project, because the previous project was a rural school. But this project is in the heart of Paramita, which is the second largest city after Sydney. Understanding the general arrangements and the services structure and facade, which again are added on levels of detail that you can get into. This project was understanding about the urban fabric of a city and looking at how much biodiversity a city that has highly been urbanized lost, and answering a very specific thesis question, which is how can the design of the built environment in this particular CBD rehabilitate, conserve its rich biodiversity whilst building a holistic hybrid habitat for humans, flora, and fauna to coexist. Now, if you go ahead into the research, you see that I've tried to justify this question first, because I've justified the site, I've justified the need, but when I justify the actual want of it, sorry, I went on mute over there. But when you justify the actual want of it, you look at the exploding population of Parramatta right now, and then calculate the percentage of green cover as opposed to the well-being that's given as per standards, and then you understand the dire need of the project in the process. Breaking down the one specific thesis question that I had into multiple questions, understanding what's biodiversity, what's changed, what's human, flora, and fauna in this particular context. Can rehabilitation happen without displacement? So in an undergrad or a master's level, if you take up something and if you try to answer a question, always try to break up the same definition that you have into simpler versions. Basically dump it down so much that you can show your presentation to somebody and still they would understand it without you having to talk over it. Understanding what's holistic, hybrid, and habitat. Looking at the two different ways a person can end up designing a space. Looking at the different user group definitions for it. And this is one of my most favorite pages, because this is the one that took me the long, even though it doesn't look like it, which is understanding the user. When you say that you want to incorporate plants and flora and fauna and biodiversity in a building, the first question that people ask is that isn't necessary that bad, because that's an artificial setting that you're putting in something. What we do not understand is that we have to end up we can't really create a new habitat. We've got to stick to what we have and then complement it with what we can do ahead. So I took up endangered species, identified their habitats, chose the habitat that I have in my particular site, filtered them with stuff that would coexist, nocturnal and daytime species, filtered out the fauna that are compatible with ones, and then ended up at this. This has a much more deeper research, but I chose to cut it down and because we're sort of a little bit tight for time, and ended up choosing this particular species and divided down the spaces into multiple area programs, made an adjacency chart, which is sort of a little bit difficult to look into, but it sort of gives me personally a little bit of clarity as to which space goes where. And then what's more important is looking at human-centric strategies and bird-centric strategies. Again, before you jump into planning, this is a step that's important in terms of identifying the user. In this particular case, my users were part human and part Swift ferrets. And then looking at it in sections. So as opposed to the previous presentation, wherein I was focused at the spaces in plan, this is the project that looks at spaces in section, because in a high rise, I can't essentially draw 25 floor plates and then expect to use 25 tracings on top of each other. Like that just doesn't work. And what does work is understanding just a basic massing of it, and then pulling out two blocks that I want, one public, one private, and looking how the AVE habitat fits in. I can go on and on about how this form sort of arrived, but I think the focus of this presentation is for you guys to look at the process. I take out this one element that I want for humans and one element that I want for my AVE users, and sort of detail them down into the nitty-gritties, understand what materials to use, what forms to use, what systems, so that they both can coexist. Do a little bit of modeling because my studio was online. I ended up photographing it at my own place and photoshopping it. Fun. The next is the public domain I mentioned earlier. So when you're taking up a project that's in an urban context, you always have to consider the users, not just in your building, but the users in the entire context. So you design the larger context. And in this particular case, the barracks, which was the open hybrid habitat, which was the dry open woodland habitat, again, that was suitable for the AVE users. So I essentially didn't have to bring this into my building. I just had to cater it well enough so that the birds could pass through my building and have feeding pods that essentially would assist them increase their numbers. Do a little bit of modeling. That's how my building looks. So what you guys just heard was for each image, and I'm going to try not to scroll into it, each image in different levels has that audio, which basically is the way the human and the bird sort of correlate. So as you go up higher in the levels, the audio changes because you'll hear more bird, less human, and lesser traffic. It's there in each of the images. So I'm going to try not to scroll into it. Looking at the key areas in design, the way the building is planned is so going a little bit into design, you look about the different users that are going to use the space. So in this particular plan, there are 3 different color of humans, and each human essentially specifies a different user. Again, highly user focused and understanding which type of users would use the space at which given interval, looking at how it sort of bleeds towards the edge and how the habitat would function at the bottom. Just going to flick through most of these, just because these are to give you an idea as to how to represent something in a high rise by just a selected few levels and not all of that. That was my 20-minute timer. A couple of views inside the habitat and seeing how it varies as you move up ahead. Again, what I'd like to give back in this particular presentation is understanding that at any given design, you have to try to cover as much as possible and not everything. So in your section, you can try to resolve each level, but if you go to do that in plan, you end up losing a lot of time that you can use to resolve other things such as structures, services, and design resolution in general. This is a little bit of going into how each building would function, understanding the structure of the building in detail, what works, what doesn't, looking at how the basic structural systems would work, breaking up that one element that I like. In this particular case, it was the high-rise towers. There's a little bit of parametric research I've done into Sierpinski geometry for the facade. These are the sort of iterations that I gave for the facade, and kind of keeping it bird and AVE specific. Again, understanding that you can go back to precedents to justify at any given point. And that's pretty much me. Yep.
Thank you, Reuben, for your elaborate and insightful presentation. Next, we have Prachi with us. Prachi is a recent graduate from the batch of 2015 to 2020. And since then, she has been pursuing her master's in architectural science at the University of Sydney. Her thesis was selected among a few others to represent College for COA National Awards for Excellence in Architectural Thesis 2020 and has also bagged a special recognition award for Ethos Transparency 50.
Thank you, Raj Lakshmi, for the amazing introduction. Shall I start with my presentation?
Yes, Prachi.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll just start now. So, hello everyone. I'm Prachi, and I'm here today to present my thesis. My design dissertation topic is making the invisibles visible. And before I get into detail, like what do I mean by invisibles and how and what we can do to make them visible, I'd first like to tell you like how did I derive to this topic or how did I come across it. So I think it was back in my second year when we were given a task to document the Maldunge village, and it was then when we were in the process of documenting, I realized something, that something was majorly missing into that. I didn't realize it until later. Like the biggest missing piece of the puzzle was like we never got to understand what are the users' dream and aspirations. I think that was missing. We had documented the entire village, each house, and we went to each and every person and asked them what kind of occupation they do, but we never got to ask them what are their dreams and aspirations. And I think which made me curious, like how would it actually affect the entire design process. So I was pretty clear by the time we were supposed to like start with the entire design dissertation process. Like I knew that I wanted my design dissertation to be user centric, and that would be street children. What I didn't know was what would I end up with. Like it could have been a school, it could have been a residential block. I didn't know that. I let the research derive that for me. So I think to like shorten it down, these are the four. I think following are the points that we need to really like have intact to get into our thesis. Like we need to have interest, and the topic should be should motivate us because we have to do it for so long. And it's good if we have some kind of previous knowledge regarding the topic and how relevant it is in the current conditions in the context, and what are what are your career goals oriented towards, and then do we have enough literature and data available, and also if the topic falls within the architectural realm. So I'll start with the research now. So the entire presentation, what I've tried to do is, along with the research and the design proposal, I've also tried to explain like why that specific data or why the specific info has led to the manifestation of the design in the end.
According to UNICEF, India is home to over 444 million children below 18 years. And together with youth, which is up to 25 years, it comprises of 52% of India's population. According to a study done by organization ActionAid India, it reveals that children are found in Mumbai. And it is in this context that the present study of street children becomes important.
So understanding this data, like what I understood, it helped me realize the intent of the research and why is the project necessary and relevant in the current context. So I think that is what collecting the data, which is such a rigorous process of getting the background, the study, and all of that. I think it comes down to help us in realizing the intent of the research.
So the design dissertation aimed to facilitate an architectural intervention for the upliftment of quality of life of street children in urban contexts.
And the formulation of the scope of work and aim help me to adhere to the design requirements and the goals, which is really important because it's a year-long process and we need to be aligned with what we had started and not deviate from it. So the aim and the objectives helps us do that.
The phenomenon of street children can be traced back to the processes of marginalization, that is, isolation of particular community or society due to various reasons, could be the caste, color, region. Children living on the streets comprise one of the most marginalized and vulnerable populations in the world. They are denied of all their basic rights. They exist almost as non-citizens and as part of the ever-increasing number of the invisible section of the society. In this video, one can easily see that due to some constraints, how an individual is not able to utilize the otherwise available resources for the others. This is exactly what marginalization does. So the next question that arises is, how do I envision the sustainable aspect that may contribute to the well-being of humanity? What would be the one key component that must exist in future-proof design? The answer to that would be adaptable architecture. Along with conventional sustainable design strategies in place, adaptable architecture is the key component which not only helps achieve the three pillars of sustainable standards but also future proofs the built environment as it is available for versatile future advancements. So, all in all, keeping all the parameters in mind, a suitable site was identified and studied. The site is located in Mumbai, Vikhroli. According to the survey of ActionAid, it has a dense population of street children in and around the 2 kilometer vicinity. It consists of millions of formal and informal settlements. So, according to the survey of ActionAid organization, 42% of total number of street children are found in the Western Railway lines, and hence the site, which is located at a distance of 1 kilometer from Vikhroli railway station, the site was identified and selected. Towards the east side of the site is the Mumbai-Agra National Highway, the Eastern Express Highway, and towards the north is the Jogeshwari-Vikhroli Link Road. The site can be accessed via both Vikhroli and Kanjurmarg railway station. As one can see in the map, the pink area demarcated towards the south of the site is actually the informal settlements, and towards the east of the national highway is the formal high-rise residential settlement. So, since the entire research was divided into 5 sections, now the task was to how do I translate the research? So each section helped me draw different conclusions. For example, the user aspirations led me to build the area program. And upon understanding and learning their livelihood, it helped me understand what could be the possible pulling factors that would attract and inspire those children to use the facility. The architecture's effect on children's psychology helped me understand and make a better area program. And the children's psychological effect on architecture helped me understand the elements of for ownership and sense of belonging that has to be provided. And lastly, the need of cost-effective and flexible solution led me to understand the elements for adaptive architecture. During this stage of design, various forms were articulated and studied. For example, the linear form, the modular unit form, or the hollow block form. All these forms had its own advantages and disadvantages, and that is what I have tried. So that all these advantage upon learning the advantages of each and every form, how can I combine all of this and reach reach a design for a built form. So, and also at the same time, various site conditions, that is the accessibility and neighborhood, help me understand where could possibly the open spaces could be, where could be the parking space. The setbacks and the drainage help me understand where there has to be a landscape buffer or if that could be a service zone or not.
And the vehicular and pedestrian circulation and the accessibility to the site help me understand how the flow of vehicles and the children or other users into the site and into the building or the platform would be. And lastly, the climate and the views from to and fro site help me understand in each direction how the facade has to be treated and where I would probably have to block the view or provide filtered view. Upon understanding the site conditions and articulating various forms, this is how the design further developed. So configuring the form to get maximum positive viewing surface area by orienting the curve form facing the natural water body, and then segregating two different landscaped areas for different kind of functions, and then assigning appropriate zoning according to user and spatial analysis. Then introducing staggered green spaces in between the functions to create a fusion of natural and built spaces was introduced. And lastly, these alternating or staggered green spaces created small and redundant green spaces. So to break the monotonous nature, the green spaces were combined to create semi-open transition spaces which can be used for multipurpose activities.
The design development helped me in weighing down the parameters which ultimately made a difference in terms of design, the user spatial experience, and the functionality, which further helped me dictate the design decisions in the later stages.
And that is how it all came together. On the ground floor came the healthcare facilities, that is a small dispensary and the administration. And to further in the side, there were alternate classrooms and workshops provided with open spaces. On the upper floors were accommodation facilities also provided if someone is in need of that, and various other storage and utility areas. So coming on to the parameters for designing of built spaces, basic form and orientation, basic structural zoning of where the warm room should and should not be placed, the defining of grid, that is for one-sided ventilation using a basic thumb rule of not going beyond 8 meter in width of the room. And then for the skin and envelope, since the users are majority going to be children, having a simple mechanism of envelope where they have a control over their own environment. And for the roof, providing appropriate skylights which would help with the natural light and ventilation. And next, the parameters for designing of unbuilt spaces would be providing a social gathering space, yoga meditation spaces, sports facility, and exhibition space, play area, and fusion of learning with play area. Starting Coming on to the site planning, starting from the east side where the main road to access the site is present, an exclusive drop-off point and parking area is provided for the staff and other rentees who would be using the commercial shops provided for the renting for the purpose of generating funds. With a 3-story height foyer made of colorful stained plastic tiles which is shading the ground, a grand entrance is provided for the children. There is a corridor of celebration with the space designed in such a way that walls of the corridor can exhibit the work of children. Distribution of workshops and classrooms were calculated according to first as per the built up area. I got to understand the number of users who would be using the facility, and then according to the guidelines for designing centers for street children formulated by UNESCO, capacity of each workshop and space required per person was kept in mind, and accordingly each workshop and classroom is designed for a capacity of 20 children. The workshops and classrooms follow the basic thumb rule for planning of grid and natural light and ventilation as discussed previously to achieve the goal of forceful positive reinforcement of psychology on children. And lastly, towards the rear end of the site is an open dining area designed in a way with no defined boundaries so the children have the freedom of exploring and enjoying the meal which was otherwise absent in their childhood. Overall, as demarcated by yellow, there are alternative breakout spaces provided. Each of these spaces is designed in a way that it offers various different kinds of activity.
Some are used as sheer play areas, while other is used as meeting and performing spaces. Each circle in the landscaped area is designed to provoke different level of intelligence of a child. For example, if one space promotes spatial intelligence due to its geometry with different heights, voids, gaps, and others would strengthen the social interaction between kids as it would demand participation and cooperation among themselves. The yoga or the exercise space provided will help acknowledge the internal aspects of a person, reaching to interpreting and orienting each one's behavior. Coming on to the services layout, apart from showing the main water supply and other kind of services layout, the idea of providing a wastewater treatment plant at the rear end of the site not only helps environmentally but also teaches and promotes children the importance of self-sustenance. On the roof plan here, again promoting the same idea of self-sustenance and sustainability, the roof is inclined in a way that a part of the rainwater would be collected in roof gutters and recharged into the ground, while some part of the runoff water goes into the central water body. I will now explain in detail how each workshop was detailed out in terms of the class arrangements, the furniture layout, and the kind of facade. Every two workshops become one cluster and can be used in multiple configurations depending on its need. Could be a single classroom, could be a double classroom. It was achieved through providing foldable partition walls. And lastly, not going into the details of the facade, but here I just wanted to explain that how the role of color in visual effects and psychological stimuli has on a child's mind, and hence four colors were chosen and used onto the facade.
How the getting down into these smaller details like designing the furniture and the facade, how this helps is in my opinion that architecture is just not limited to creating spatial distinction and experiences, but it also helps the user to interact with the space according to their specific mood and liking. So it is really necessary and important for us to get down to these level of detailing while doing the dissertation.
In this cross section, which cuts through the workshops, it can be seen that the 2-meter wide corridor which celebrates and exhibits children's work. Also, a roof skylight is provided with fixed mosquito mesh to provide adequate ventilation at all times. In this quad section of south facade of the workshop, there is a vertical perforated aluminium fin provided for shading, as well as it acts as support for creepers to grow. Further, there are vertical sliding folding metal shutters provided with horizontal louvers. Lastly, a metal grill horizontal platform is created with MS plates as railings which can act as spades for plantation pots. In this cross section cutting through the classrooms, it shows how a sliding folding partition can easily be utilized to reconfigure the classrooms as per the user needs. It can be used as two individual classrooms, or it can also be used as one bigger space. The two quad sections cut through south and north facades respectively, with south facade being the same as that of workshop. Towards the north facade, as seen in the section, is a 2-meter wide corridor provided with railings, and the classroom is well ventilated by providing fixed mosquito net at the top of the exhibition wall. Also, the roof is designed in such a way that it acts as a double layered roof for better thermal resistance, with bottom layer being a filler slab above which sits a layer of erica nut tiles supported through concrete stubs. Utilization of erica nut tiles was to promote sustainability and also because of abundance of this nut in the coastal region.
I'm reaching towards the end of the presentation, and these are few of the questions that I constantly kept on asking myself, or it was constantly asked during my whole journey of design dissertation. So some of them were like, how can I make my own thesis unique? How is the form development user centric?
And what strategies have I undertaken to make my project more sustainable? So to answer that, I would get into a little detail of how I had the process of my research while interviewing the street children. So I had a chance to interview multiple of them, but the difference between what I had done now and what we usually do is, I think what we miss is, like I had previously mentioned, that we forget to ask them what are their dreams and aspirations and drawing conclusions from them. It was very surprising to know, the more I got to talk to them, I realized there was a pattern going on. They all had something in common. They all wanted to become something, and they were very driven towards that. So to conclude that, like, I think receiving rehabilitation services and availability of employment opportunities and the guidance and emotional support, these three things are the social determinants of hope and aspirations among these young children. And the four tangible emotions within the setting of which are like limited to those that give a tangible viewpoint within the setting of an open and casual recreational space. The four emotions are cognition of a place, the feeling of security, feeling of attachment, and feeling of social interaction. If all these can be achieved appropriately, it signifies that the child has perceived, recognized, and accepted the space, which in turn means that he has experienced the place on his or her terms. And also these three criteria gets instilled in the child on a cumulative basis. So to combine all of that, that is how the understanding these parameters led to the previously discussed the area program, which is the built and the unbuilt spaces, the pulling factors, the elements for the ownership and the sense of belonging, and the elements for the adaptive architecture. And lastly, I think I would just like to conclude by saying that the envision of the design dissertation was to create an opportunity for the child. Even a 6 month to a 1 year of learning procedure until the child has reached a satisfactory level of understanding can help them achieve their dream. The Envision facility being located in Mumbai can function to help up to 800 children within a group of what at a time. And assuming 50% of these children might even drop out within 6 to 12 months for various reasons, it can still benefit them. At this rate in Mumbai, providing only 3 such facilities within a span of 15 years, it can reach out to each and every each and every underprivileged kid of the city. I have also identified few possible stakeholders within the social setting. They could possibly be government schemes for funding, government support for idea and funding, and bank owners for borrowing site temporarily, whose land is vacant for over 20 years, and NGOs for teaching, volunteering, supporting, partly funding, and even managing the facility. That is all from my end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prachi, for an insightful presentation. We may start with a Q&A session. If any queries, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Prachi, and thank you, Rubin. I think it was wonderful to see the overall process, and I think the lockdown session has completely gone online presentation and online interaction. So the presentation tricks, the use of different drawings, the quality of drawings, the quality of portfolio is such something which is very interesting to look at. I just want to ask one thing to Rubin. I think Rubin, your school, the integrated learning center is, I think the site is a bit contoured site. So I just wanted to ask you, because we also have in third year the similar project and similar site. So how did you really deal with the contour site?
Hi, ma'am. Thanks for the good question.
Yeah.
I think the key of tackling a contour project is trying not to cut off ground floor, first floor, and second floor plans, but to cut plans at levels. So if you're working on a contour project, what we tend to do is you look at buildings that are in different levels, and you make sure that when a building reaches a certain height, that a building at a higher level in the contour interacts with it. So you can't place two buildings at two different points at a height and expect them to be a part of one single complex. But in essence, you need a building that works throughout the contour. Yeah, ma'am, like you would be knowing that there are so many books, especially that work towards earthen architecture, so adobe architecture. That again, I'm working in a school at the moment, which is in a heavily contoured site. And what we really understand, which doesn't come in an academic perspective, is cost. So when we look at excavation in a contour site, just hollowing it out and making it flat is the worst possible thing for the client, for us, for everybody. And I think, yeah, pretty much looking at how different levels work out, and also working in 3D helps a lot for me personally. I did my entire thesis, both my theses in SketchUp, which is completely not acceptable. But what does work out in SketchUp is you can sort of look at it in perspective all the time, and then go back to plans, which especially in a contour helps a lot. But yeah, I hope that answered your questions.
Hi, Reuben. I remember your thesis was about like you looked into Gurukul concepts.
Yeah,
Initially.
ma'am.
Yeah. So how did you try to bring that in your design when you did your undergrad thesis?
Yeah, ma'am. Hi.
Hi.
I'll start answering. Neha, ma'am, were you saying something? You were on mute for that last part.
Yeah, so actually I was just throwing the question so that everyone is getting awake with their tea in hand. So I was just asking, for this question is both for Prachi and Reuben, for you, that which software you were actually working for producing the final drawings. Like you were already working, you are saying that you are, I think SketchUp has a lot of potential, but we don't really explore it. I know a few people that they are completely dependent. They even produce the working drawing on SketchUp. So I think we are just uh, thinking that it might just help in the initial set of drawings. So that is
Getting back to Kavita ma'am's question.
sure.
Prachi, do you want to add after I'm sort of done with it? Yeah, so just going back to the Gurukul, ma'am, thank you so much for remembering it. It's beautiful that you remember it, even though it's so far away. But yeah, like I mentioned in my presentation, I started off with Gurukul. That was something that I envisioned the project to be about. And then with each new case study, I realized that Gurukuls don't exist anymore. You can't really expect any parent in the 20th century to leave their kid in a school and come back after 21 years. That doesn't work. And that was one of the major problems justifying the Gurukul concept, which then led me to look into all those different education systems and see what has a Gurukul system become in 2018. Yeah, in 2018. And that sort of led to identifying the Jiddu Krishnamurti school, which had an integral learning system, and then looking at that as my base for the future designs. In terms of softwares, I totally agree. I've done working drawings in SketchUp. I still do working drawings in SketchUp. I work simultaneously with Revit and Rhino, and sometimes in AutoCAD, but I always tend to go back to it when I'm doing concept modeling. Just because I love the fact that I can work in perspective, which a lot of the other software such as Revit don't let you. Revit gives you a very good isometric perspective to design, but it's not humane enough to understand scale and proportion. Rhino does to a lot of extent, but I'm not that good at Rhino, to be honest. But yeah, Prachi, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. So I think so I think I did my dissertation last year. So by that time this has really changed in the past 1 year.
So I think during my thesis, I completely relied upon SketchUp, like Reuben mentioned, and producing good drawings in AutoCAD. And other than that, for presentations and all, I think it was majorly, my work was majorly dependent upon Photoshop, Illustrator, and a little bit of InDesigning. For the for during the book semester 9 research, I think. So but if you ask me now what I might have probably like change, I would have made it, that would have really like made a difference if had I known the softwares back then. Or I think if I had to like I talked about like experimenting with a lot of different kinds of forms and like see what fits best for me. So I think there are a lot of good softwares like Rhino and Grasshopper which lets you do that. I didn't know that time, but I have like time to explore it, so I know like what mistakes I've done. So I think that would really help in that. And otherwise, there are a lot of tools to understand the to get into more detail about the wall assemblies, and like there are simulation tools which help you understand the sustainability part of your design, like the wall assembly, is it really working, the kind of facade that you're making, is it really working, that there are a lot of softwares you can look into for that, which I didn't know that time, and I wished I knew that time. So I think that is one. We are taught ecotech, but I think it doesn't really does justice to it. So I think we should like explore more on our own and see what fits best for us. I think there's Revit, definitely Revit. For if had I known Revit, it would have really helped me get good drawings, and also at the same time it would have helped me understand the working drawing, like the sustainability aspect, the wall assembly aspect more in Revit. So I think yeah, that's all.
Yeah, there's always a regret in terms of softwares you don't know. 7 years down, I still regret not having learned softwares. But I think it's natural. You can't. I think it has to be sort of a balance between learning softwares and working. I spent a majority of my time before my master's learning softwares that I thought I'd use in my master's. But when you're actually in the grill of it, when you actually are in a design studio, you always tend to go to your comfort zone. So you tend to go to stuff that you know to do, that you know, because you can estimate the time that you can produce something out of it in something that you've done, as opposed to something that you're trying out. That said, I would personally highly suggest anybody who's considering going for their masters outside, or looking for work outside, or even probably in some of the bigger firms, to look into ArchiCAD and Revit, majorly because these are the softwares that work collaboratively. And when you get out of uni and when you sort of start working, you'd realize that you don't ever do a project on your own. You're always going to be part of a team, and the file that you're working on has to be worked on by somebody else at some given point. And what helps is Revit has sort of like a BIM platform, which is a central file you work in, and everybody's sort of working on it all the time. And the same goes with a little bit of ArchiCAD, and that's going to be the same, like regardless of wherever you work. There's going to be AutoCAD, there's going to be a lot of SketchUp, but that's going to be for brushing up things and less than working on collaborative projects. But yeah, I think, are we a little bit over time? Are they going to kick us out? You sure?
I think we can take a few questions from students now. Maybe Ishwar and Rajalakshmi, you can moderate those. So if anyone is having any question to our presenter, please unmute yourself and don't hesitate to ask.
I have a question for Prachi. Like, what were the comments and reviews that you got from COA National Awards when you presented to them? You didn't hear me.
Sorry, I did not present it. So the process is a bit different. Like people are from each and every college. I think 4 people are shortlisted to represent the college in for the COA award, and then among the I don't know how many students overall in that zone they compete, and
I think
only
it's
10 of
80.
them.
I think it's 80 students. Yeah.
Okay, so I think among those only I guess 10 people get to present, and and within those 10, 2 people I think win that zone. So I was selected from the college, and but I didn't get to present it on the platform.
So much awkward silence. But it was good to see at least some faces after a very long time. Yeah, I'm happy. I know some people have reached out to me on messages, but I'm happy to take questions. It's 11:30 here, and I gotta crash. I gotta wake up tomorrow early. But I'm happy to stick around for a while if anybody has any questions. Feel free to reach me out
Hi,
on.
Reuben.
No, Reuben, I just want to say that it was very good to see you presenting, and it's good to see your progress as well.
Thank you.
As you have finished your masters, your drawings, everything changed, and the way you mature, it's wonderful to see. Thank you for presenting.
Thank you so much. It was good to see you too, ma'am. Again, I was surprised you remembered that I started off at Gurukul. I think it was 3 years back.
I mean, I think your guide was Mahesh.
Mahesh.
Yeah, but I kind of have seen it over the shoulder sometime. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I presented to my just junior batch after I was done. It's a pretty long presentation where I know a couple of faces. I've been like flicking through the lists to see if I know anybody.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
But yeah.
Reuben, yeah, thanks for presenting.
No, Nissan, thank you so much for inviting me. I know I've been pushing it for a very long time, just because I was, and I have a lame excuse, but I was busy. I was mid my master's thesis, and that's pretty much the reason I couldn't turn up or sort of have things up. But yeah, it feels good to be back. If I'll probably stick around for another 5 or 10 minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask now.
Hi, Reuben. I have.
Hi, Ishwar. Awesome.
What are the effects of social media on relationship inside mixed use neighborhood and on the urban design mixed use?
Can you say that again? What are the
effects of social media on relationship inside the mixed use neighborhood and on the urban design of the mixed use neighborhood?
Good question, actually. See, when we look at a mixed use neighborhood, again, especially in a place like India, we have to look at what mixture is it. Is it a mixture of young people with old people? Is it a mixture of different cultures? Or is it just a mixture of opposing mentalities, like people probably of the same age? That's one level of clarity that I would probably look at if I'm going at that. And then the second part, which you asked about social cultural influences, that goes back into understanding what has been the norm for them, whether the norm has been at extremities, whether people are used to being in a social space. I mean, with COVID, everything has changed, but were people interrelated with their functions, with their day-to-day activities before, or were they independent? So if you look at housing as an example, there are two types of people. There's one kind of people who are always chatty with their neighbors. So the first thing they step out when they do is they head out, they get their morning newspaper, they have a sort of small talk, and then they head out. And then there's that another kind of people who end up not seeing their neighbor throughout their lives. They would not, if I give a police verification check for my own place, they can head into my district and then they'd know, because my dad talks to everybody. But if they do the same thing in Australia, my neighbor doesn't understand who I am. He would say, oh, I know there are brown people next to my place, but I don't know who that is. So it's understanding which category you're dealing with, whether it is categories of people that sort of respond to stimuli, or whether it is categories of people who don't really give importance to what's really that you're putting into the picture. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, somewhat. Do you have any positive takeaways from maybe Asian countries and where you live? Can you?
In terms of mixed use development.
Yeah, mixed use. Yeah.
One thing I do know in mixed use that works, and this is because it's much in specific to Sydney. Mixed use, Sydney, first of all, is not a good example for housing. There are much better examples. I'd ask you to look at Austria and Vienna. Vienna has one of the best housing systems in the world. But what the Sydney does do right is mixed development. Just because there's money in housing because it needs to house people, and then there's money with retail, and how they both club it is almost all the buildings have to end up being adaptive reused buildings. And what they do good is they have a certain system that connects nearby buildings by giving away what they have in the ground floor as public realm, as public domain. So probably the first 3 floors you give off to the community, and then the government gives you a sort of give back. They sort of give you in terms of FSI. It's a little bit nitty gritty, but basically they give you more floor space to construct if you give what you have a little bit in the bottom towards the public domain. And that was what I was sort of trying to hit at when I was talking about how much important a ground space is. So basically, in every high rise, your value lies in how high you go. And how high you go depends on how much you give back. So basically, your ground, first floor, second floor, and third floor, probably you'll give back to the community as a library or a public space, or some place just like a plaza. And everything about that, you can either do residential or you can opt for a research center or whatnot. And this is the same with universities. So if you look at an open university, and it's pretty much the same in India too, if you go into a little bit in a city context. But yeah, pretty much
Yeah.
does that.
Yeah, it answers. Thank you so much, Reuben,
No worries.
for
I think it's time
presenting
for
to
us
them.
to wrap up.
Yep.
On the behalf of the whole team, I would like to thank Reuben and Prachi for joining us today and the audience for their presence in this session. Hope to see you all again next Thursday for new insightful presentations. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.